Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I am so happy to welcome authors Tim Sledge and David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. I can see David on the video. You've got clothes on though. But thank you guys. Thank you guys for being on Mindship Podcast.
Oh, you guys always have something smart to say about me.
Always have to.
Glad to be here, Clint. Glad to be here. And just my first time to meet David.
Yeah, good to be with you, Tim.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got a Canadian and a Texan and a guy who lives in North Wales now. I'm originally from Seattle, so we're scattered all over the world. But it's really interesting because obviously I've had both you guys on the show before. We've talked in the past. We were actually going to do an episode on helping Christians to deconstruct and looking at some difficult theological and biblical problems. But now, with all the stuff that's going on with the coronavirus, I thought maybe it would be a better idea to talk about some of the Christian responses that we have been seeing to the coronavirus. And to be fair, it's not every Christian. There's a lot of very responsible churches that are closed and they're maintaining the social distancing and all that. But there's been some very bizarre things that have been said. And I wonder if maybe there's some Christians out there who are questioning, and this would maybe allow them to enter into some deconstruction. So what have you guys been seeing as far as some of the Christian responses to this virus situation?
Well, here in Texas, he's the lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick of Texas. And on Fox News, I think it was last night, he said that there are things more important than living.
Like dying?
Well, he did, but to be fair, to put it in context, he did say like keeping America around for my kids and my grandkids.
Okay.
Dan Patrick is an evangelical Christian. In fact, used to attend the last church I pastored. He attended there for a while. But I'd say that's pretty crazy talk myself. There are things more important than living.
And we've heard that line. Yeah, I've seen people with signs, give me liberty or give me death, but yet it doesn't mean what the original quote meant. Give me liberty or give me death. Let me go out and violate social distancing, or I could risk dying. It's crazy.
And I do get the tension for people who've lost their jobs, who are trying to figure out how to pay their bills and buy groceries. I get the complexity of how do you make those tough decisions about restarting when and how and all of that. But it seems strange to me that when I was a Christian, I was thinking this morning about 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. And for me, Jesus was a model of compassion, especially toward the downtrodden, especially toward somebody over there who's having a worse time than I am. But it seems like at least evangelical American white Christians today, they're mean. They lack, Dan Patrick, there are things more important than living. Well, he can make that decision for himself if he wants to, but I'm sorry, I don't accept his right to make that decision for me. So
what about?
I think it's a time when we do see the craziness, the crazy side of faith.
Are you seeing that in Canada, David? I know there's been a recent mass shooting, which was in Nova Scotia, which is shocking for Canada. I don't know if it has anything to do with what's going on with the coronavirus situation. The stress and anxiety caused this guy to go off. I don't know, but are you seeing protests and that kind of thing like we're seeing in America?
Oh, no. I mean, there's a few here and there, very small scale, but I'm pretty proud of the Canadian government's response to the pandemic. And everybody I know, and I know a lot of people across Canada, of course, but everybody I know is pretty happy as well with the response in terms of funding, bailouts, protections, medical care. I mean, I'm in New Brunswick. I'm just down the road from the mass shootings, but here in New Brunswick, we've been case-free for several days now and haven't had one death. So I'm pretty much generally pleased, but Canada's quite a bit different than the United States. I mean,
you could say that, yeah.
You have a sane person leading your country. That would be one difference.
Well, that's one big difference.
The biggest, he has nicer hair too.
That's true. And he's growing a beard now.
The biggest difference is that Canada is pretty free in terms of government, is pretty free of that evangelicalism has taken a real foothold, I think, in the United States. But however, on the other hand, there is a conservative movement afoot that sounds a lot like Trumpism. But we're seeing that around the world, sort of this resurgence of, I dare say, kind of fascist ideology, super right-wing, close the borders kind of ideas and things like that. So Canada's quite a bit different from the United States in that way. But my wife's American, my kids are dual citizens, I have family and friends and everybody in the States, and it's kind of a freak show. I mean, watching from upstairs in Canada, it's really seems kind of crazy. So I was just watching a video just a few moments ago. You're probably seeing the pictures and videos of those nurses that are anti-protesting in front of hospitals, trying to protect the parking lots and the driveways, and they're standing out there in their scrubs and their face masks, and everybody around them shouting in their faces and calling them fake nurses, and that they've been bought by Bill Gates, or all this kind of stuff. It's just like insane, and it's all due, I feel, to this sort of super conservative evangelical kind of weird theology that has infiltrated whole groups of people, and this kind of magical thinking has taken over, and it's gotten out of control, in my opinion. But
America seems to be the leader in some of that craziness too. What were you going to say, Tim?
Well, we're winning, and Trump is right. We are tired of winning now. We're number one in coronavirus cases and deaths.
Not the kind of winning you want, though, is it?
No, it isn't. But I think it's about reality. I mean, you've got your people who say, okay, we're going to live in reality and science and evidence, facts. That's what those things tell us what reality is. And others, and this is where, I really work hard I try to remember the good things about faith, and I try to remember that I'd say most of the people I knew in churches were good people. They were sincere. So I try to keep a balance there, but wow, it's getting a little harder to do that. And I guess it's important to remember that not everybody's in the Christian world is thinking like this, but it seems like if you've been practicing a faith that's based on imagining things, you're talking to a silent man who died 2,000 years ago, an invisible silent man, and you think that's normal. You practice prayer. And you say that prayer is powerful and prayer helps. But when pressed, you always have an answer. And I wrote a tweet a couple of weeks ago, we are praying for you. What does that mean? Well, here's what it means. If you don't get coronavirus, we'll claim that God shielded you. That's how I answered the prayer. If you get it and you recover, we'll say, praise God, you were healed. God healed you. But if you die, we'll explain that God had a reason. And so my concluding line was this: the same results are possible by praying to a telephone pole. And then I hashtagged it, isn't the pole good? And you think about it, it's like a circular logic thing. Prayer always works, but what does it really do? And in terms of deconstruction, Clint, you started off with that question. I think prayer may be the Achilles heel of faith,
Mm-hmm.
And this is a time when the sort of the absurdity of prayer is coming into clear view, at least for those outside the faith. Now, I do understand that prayer comforts people, and I get that. But that has nothing to do with the recipient who's supposed to be listening. I mean, the poll could give you this, the telephone poll could give you the same results.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. The thing about prayer, I was reading an article by Tony Perkins, who's the head of the Family Research Council, which is a far-right kind of think tank organization in America. And he said that it's a good thing, prayer is a good thing because it reduces anxiety and depression, which is ironic because so much of evangelicalism causes a lot of anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. But he said, this is an interesting one, there's that cognitive dissonance. He says, when faced with the fear of the unknown, meaning the virus, turning to an all-knowing God is a good place to start. And for people of faith, we know that God answers prayers. And it says in James 5:16, the prayer of a righteous man or person is powerful and effective. So God answers prayer. I think there's the crux of the issue too, is that for Christians, they have the belief that there's an omnipotent, all-powerful God in charge of everything. And he answers prayer and all, like you said, Tim, but we're not seeing that. And how come the virus is completely out of control? You can't seem to reconcile those two things, but there seems like there's always an escape clause. God's always got an escape clause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have here in the U.S., we have Mike Pence, our vice president, a man who reportedly does not believe in evolution, mm-hmm. battling a virus that came to be by evolving. And he's in charge of the response team, at least in name.
Yeah, he's a science denier.
Yeah, so how did the coronavirus get here? If it didn't evolve, so did God create it? Oh, wait, I know, the devil had something to do with it. It's because Adam and Eve, who, by the way, I didn't vote for them to be my representative, but they sinned in the garden. I'm still confused about the Neanderthals and how they fit into all that. But anyway, the first man and woman sinned, so that's why we have things like viruses. I guess that's the answer that Christian theology has.
We're living in a fallen world. That's what they say. What were you going to say, David?
Well, the variety and diversity of responses to the virus, mm-hmm. They're antithetical, actually, many of them. So, like, on the one hand, this is God punishing, mm-hmm. You for your sin. On the other hand, this is Satan kicking out old people because they're the tithers and the Bible readers,
That's
so
right.
It's just another way of trying to cope with a reality that's beyond our control. Seems to be beyond our control. It's still a virus that we don't fully understand, and we don't mm-hmm. fully know how we're going to treat it, and we don't know if you can get it a second time. We don't know if it's going to resurge, So it's like in the face of this monumental problem, there's all kinds of theories just pouring out, and mm-hmm. It's just an attempt. It's kind of like I was reading yesterday that crime novels, murder mystery novels, have a theology. Mm. And the theology is that there's always a reason for somebody to be murdered. There's always a reason. You find out who did it, and you find out the motive and everything, and it all makes sense in the end. It all comes together. And it's kind of like with believers or religions of all kinds, or even non-religious people. We're constantly looking for meaning and trying to figure out, why is this happening? Mm-hmm. And so this is why we have these thousands of theories as to why this is happening. That's based on magical thinking, a term I like to use a lot. I think mm-hmm. it was coined by Joan Didion. She actually wrote a book called The Year of Magical Thinking. Which is an awesome book, but and it's this whole magical thinking rather than scientific thinking. So you see countries that are nations that are affected by or influenced by religious kind of thinking or magical thinking are suffering more than those who are taking a scientific approach.
Absolutely, that's an irony for you.
It's an irony. You take some leaders around the world who may be atheists or maybe not, but they could be believers even, but they're taking a scientific, rational response to the virus and seeing success. So it's just perplexing to me. For me, my deconstruction, my own personal deconstruction, began when my magical thinking was challenged to the point now where I don't believe in magic. And when you stop believing in magic, suddenly a lot of things make sense. And you can actually feel like you can take control of your life and become responsible and independent and autonomous and self-determining and get shit done.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think there maybe not with the whole dissonance thing. At some point you think things are going to get so crazy that they're going to have to come to their senses, when in fact, the crazier it is, the better it is for dissonance. So that's
there's lots of ways you can quash or quell the cognitive dissonance, and we're seeing that. I've heard cliches, I would say it's loaded language or thought terminating cliches. We've heard people say, I'm covered by Psalm 91, that God will protect you. He will protect you from the pestilence and the plague. It says right there in the Bible. I've heard people say faith trumps fear. They've said, I'm protected from, the virus by the blood of Jesus. I'm covered in the blood of Jesus. It's a hoax. It's something that's, designed to take down Trump and his presidency and ruin the economy. And it's all a hoax and blah, blah, blah. They're denying science. They're not even thinking critically. And yet they're taking refuge in these cliches, these platitudes.
I think there's another group within Christianity, and that's the people who they're sincere in their faith. They may be either end of the theological spectrum, but their thinking is compartmentalized. They know this is a virus. This is something that evolved. It's dangerous. Only science is going to help us. We need to depend on the doctors. And so they're living, it's a heightened compartmentalization between faith and self-protection. They need to cover their face when they go out in public. They need to stay at home. They know this. So on one side, they're living and thinking like a secular person would in regard to the pandemic. But on the other side, they're still practicing their faith. They're praying for people. God, help those who are sick. Please help my friend who has coronavirus. It is cognitive dissonance. I mean, it's a radical compartmentalization of, and it's kind of like here in Houston, I had people in my last church who worked in the oil business. One guy was a geologist, and his job was to, based on the ancient age of the earth and the layers and how everything happened over eons and eons, he told oil companies, this is a good place to look to find oil. And this is based on the earth. Oil was formed over millions and millions of years from little tiny living things that got, compressed under layers and layers. And I don't know all the technology of it and the science, but you get what I'm saying. But at the same time, this individual had other beliefs. Maybe Adam and Eve were two individual people, other beliefs that just didn't go with that at all. But he managed to live in both worlds, seemingly successfully.
Where the earth is 6,000 years old on Sunday in church, but the rest of the week it's millions or billions of years old.
Right, exactly.
And that's how he makes a living.
And one thing David said earlier about deconstruction, I was thinking this morning that the Bible is like 1,000,000 times easier to understand once you recognize it is not a message from God. It is there is not a scarlet thread running through it. It's a bunch of stuff written by a bunch of people that didn't even always agree with each other nor understand what the others were saying. And once you see that, it's like, oh yeah, this makes complete sense. This is just what some guy thought up. And then here's another guy that came along and thought something different. And they don't go together. There's no way to make them go together because they don't. And ultimately that's a lot simpler than mental gymnastics that at least I used to go through to try to put it all together and explain how it all fits.
Oh, I did. One of my favorite subjects was biblical theology. And that was our stock in trade, was looking at how the whole Bible hangs together, somehow finding that scarlet thread. What about some of these responses we've seen? For example, we've seen churches that have been staying open. That's one of the things that we've seen. certainly in America and in other places. Brazil, for example, they won some sort of lawsuit recently that allows some churches to stay open. You've got this guy down in Louisiana, this pastor Tony Spell. He's been a high-profile figure because now he's actually been arrested again for trying to run a protester over with one of the church buses. I don't know if you saw that on the news, but
no, I didn't.
He came backing out of the church driveway with one of his buses and kept going and going and going and almost ran this protester down who's been standing out in front of his church with a sign for several weeks protesting the fact that they keep holding these services. And his response is, it's all this religious persecution. Yeah, it's religious persecution. They're trying to shut the churches down. That's what this is all about. So we're fighting for our rights as Americans and as Christians. And we're seeing a couple of other places where churches have remained open and put people at risk. And there's magical thinking, surely. They've said, God's going to protect us, faith trumps fear, and all that.
Yeah.
One of the disturbing realizations I had during my latter years as a pastor, it really bugged me, but I knew it was true. It's when I realized that the people in my church who didn't take it quite so seriously seemed more well-adjusted. The people who were there, like total commitment and concerned about every little thing that the Bible says and trying to figure it all out, and probably including me, we were all a little more uptight about things. And I think about this kind of middle group. They're sincere, they believe it, but they don't take it quite so seriously. And these are the ones who, if the pastor says, come to church, God's going to take care of us, they're probably going to stay home, because it gets back to that same idea. These are people who know, well, I think I'm going to go with the science on this one.
I'll go with science.
Yeah, I'm like you, Tim. I know a lot of people, a lot of believers who are being wise about the coronavirus thing. And, they don't know what they don't understand prayer, and even though they pray, and nobody does really. They don't understand prayer or believe in these amazing miracles or whatever. Yet they're believers. So there is a lot of that different kind of grades of. But then you see just some of the stuff that's getting in the headlines right now, that's getting the attention, is the crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. We're not hearing so much from, like the Bishop Spongs of the world.
Yeah, we're the more balanced, progressive side. Yeah, that's a good point. It's not all Christians, is it?
No.
There's a lot of Christians out there, like you say, who are just trusting in the science and listening to the authorities and watching the news in the rest of the world. And I think some of this, I was going back to my thought about, you said something about trying to live your life according to the Bible. I think Tim was saying that. I think a lot of Christians have this idea that we have to have this biblical worldview or Christian worldview. Everything's got to relate somehow to the Bible. And in that, I think, comes this desire for explanation or interpretation of events. The Bible interprets events from history and says, God is the one who did this, that, and the other thing. He's directing the course of history. And so when they look at the coronavirus, they're thinking the same thing. They're saying there must be an interpretation that somehow involves God doing something if he's in control on any sort of level. So they're driven in a way to come up with some interpretation, some explanation that puts God in it somehow.
Well, yeah, it's like, I guess the extreme example would be somebody like John Piper, who is like an ultra Calvinist.
Yeah, fundamentalist, really.
Sovereign and totally in control, and everything is managed right down to the minutia by an almighty God. And, he puts his spin on it, of course, but yeah, he's the extreme of this is all divine.
Well, I think this is a frightening foretaste of climate change implications. In other words, everything we're talking about here relates to climate change as well. And it seems like one of the reasons that many Christians are not concerned about climate change is that, well, we know how history is going to end. And as a preacher, I used to say, a lot of things are going to happen, but God will not let anything happen that gets things off track for his ultimate purpose. Mm-hmm. So I can see why Christians today might say, well, yeah, climate change, but it's certainly not how the world's going to end, and it couldn't be. We just don't need to worry about it because Jesus told us what we really need to worry about, and that's all been prophesied and everything. So again, it's like, what is reality, and how are you going to respond to reality? And one interesting question that's been on my mind lately. Again, I try to keep in mind how many good people are in the church that I know, friends and family, logical thinking, compartmentalized, yes, but they're not bad people. But as I look at U.S. white evangelicals as a group, and I remember that 80% of them voted for Donald Trump, and so many of them even now, despite all of his moral failings and the fact that he lies incessantly, they still support him. And I'm having trouble not starting to see this as a dangerous group because they are impacting what is happening to the rest of us.
This seems like as good a place as any to take a break. Actually, I have to tell you a funny story. When I was doing this podcast recording with Tim and David the other day, Tim was really proud of the fact that he had bought a really good quality microphone to use. And a couple times during the recording, once at the very beginning, so I had to start all over, and then again just at the break, he bumped the cable and it came unplugged from his computer. So we lost Tim. So that's a good place to take a break. Actually, we are going to come back around. I circle around in the second half of this episode. And so we're going to come back to that thread in the second half of this chat. Actually, how things have changed. We're not seeing evangelical Christians as just good people who might be sort of misled or part of the Trump cult, but actually a dangerous group because they are literally following the advice of their dear leader and putting people's lives at risk, including their own, and what's behind all that. And so we are going to give Tim a chance to pick up that thought again and finish his idea. I just wanted to mention what's coming up here in the next few weeks, a few episodes of Mindshift Podcast. I've got a discussion with Sam Perry, who, along with Andrew Whitehead, wrote the book Taking America Back for God. This is another discussion sort of similar to what I talked about with Catherine Stewart the other day about Christian nationalism. And he and Andrew have written this book, and they're both sociologists, which is quite fascinating because they approach the whole thing from a sociological point of view, looking at statistics and data from surveys of religion. We had a chat the other night, me and Sam. The recording's already been done, and it is really, really good, very informative as to what's going on in the sort of Trump evangelical Christian nationalist world and why you should be concerned about it. I've also got an episode after that coming up with David from the Graceful Atheist podcast. I was just on his show the other day. In fact, that episode dropped on the 30th of April. It's just come out as I'm doing this recording. So if you want to go find that, look up the Graceful Atheist. We had a really good conversation, and so I had him back on my show, so that's going to be dropping the episode after the one with Sam Perry. I've also done a recording with Conway and Siegelman, who are the authors, of course, of Holy Terror and Snapping, and we had an absolutely fantastic conversation. What we did is we implemented the model from their book, which is the idea of information disease, as they call it, and we look at the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus, and their argument is that it's not just from a point of view that he's incompetent, which he certainly is, but they argue that it's actually intentional, and why that is and what's going on. So you are not going to want to miss this conversation coming up with Conway and Siegelman. Again, that recording has already been done, so there's a lot of episodes already finished, and they are queued up. They're waiting to drop. So we've got Sam Perry, we've got David from the Graceful Atheist, followed then by Conway and Siegelman. And in fact, speaking of David from the Graceful Atheist, he has agreed to be our guest on this month's Mindshift Zoom call. This is something we do for those people who support this show on Patreon. This is one of the benefits that you get in addition to receiving these episodes early on Patreon. You get to be a part of these monthly calls, and I like to have former guests of the show. In fact, we had the one just the other week with Stephanie McCown, who was on the show just a few weeks ago. That one is so good. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and share it. So if you want to see that call that we had with Stephanie, look over on my Mindshift Podcast Facebook page, because that is going up today, the 1st of May. So if you want to get a feel for what we talk about on those calls, you can head over to the Facebook page and take a look at our chat with Stephanie McCown. All right, so let's get back into the talk. We're going to pick back up with Tim Sledge and David Hayward as we continue looking at this issue of confronting magical thinking, some of the Christian responses to the coronavirus.
One of the things that fascinates me is, when I was a pastor and an evangelical and all that, was the kind of the disdain for the flesh and for the material and for the body and the physical. We always sort of quoted that. I think it was Teilhard de Chardin who said, we're not a body with a spirit, we're a spirit with a body kind of idea. Mm-hmm. Kind of this putting down the flesh and crucifying the flesh and beating back the body, and that the material was inferior to the spiritual and everything. And we're seeing that now, like with that, I forget the guy from Texas who said, there's things more important than living. Is that kind of ideology where the economy is more important, or the country of the United States is more important, or something is more important than our bodies, and this willingness to sacrifice people for a greater good is all coming out of this kind of anti-material ideology. And that's what I think is really, really dangerous. And sort of this climate change thing too. It's like, well, if we all die, then it's the end of the world and we all go to heaven. It's like Jesus comes back. That's when he comes back. And the moon's going to turn red, and ground's going to dry up, and clouds are going to come in, and there's not going to be any rain. There's going to be drought, and yes, praise the Lord. And it's this kind of denial and the disdain for the physical that is behind a lot of this, I think, and we're seeing it too, like in their reaction to science and doctors and nurses who are actually hands-on touching these people with the COVID virus. And they just don't care, Trump is more important, or the United States is more important, or the economy is more important,
And that's hard to understand. That's hard for me to understand.
Do you want to finish your thought, Tim? You dropped out for a second. You were saying
sorry about that.
Evangelicals are actually a dangerous group, and I'm starting to agree with that more and more. Your actual garden variety evangelical is a really nice person, but they're supporting a president who's denying science, who daily goes out and spreads lies that are killing people. We're not talking about platitudes and abstractions here. We're talking about telling people to do things that is going to put people in harm's way.
Right. And as I was saying earlier, he hasn't shot anybody on Fifth Avenue yet, but his actions have led to the deaths of thousands of people. And yet many evangelicals continue to follow him, despite his lack of morality, his constant lying. And there's another issue here that I was looking the other day at the map of the United States, showing where there's a lot of coronavirus cases. And you think about red states, blue states, and rural versus cities. I haven't thought through this as much as I'd like to, so it might be disputable, but I'll say it anyway. You could almost predict for a particular part of the United States whether they're going to be taking the pandemic seriously based on how likely they are to either be or know somebody who's recently traveled outside the United States. In other words, because, a lot of the reason New York City and Los Angeles and other urban areas, and we know there were many causes and how it spread is complex, but it would appear that one big element, though, is travel from other parts of the world, maybe more from Europe than from China. But to me, that ties in with how do you see the world? Is it we versus they? And this is another thing that's perplexing to me about today's evangelical Christians, because to me, when I was a Christian and a minister, the gospel wasn't national. It was humanity. Jesus died for the world. That was how I saw it. And so And I always had a hard time, I didn't want to do a big 4th of July Independence Day service in my church, because to me, it was about the worldwide family of God. And I don't see that with U.S. evangelicals. I don't see it with Franklin Graham and people like that. It's like we're the good guys. And yeah, yeah.
He's another one. Which are all diehard Trump supporters too, by the way.
Yeah.
Very
vocal. By the way,
I
wanted to mention, I read the other day that Benny Hinn, who's a famous healing televangelist, he's shut down his healing services until further notice. Reason being, passage in Romans that says we're supposed to obey the authorities. So they're not having any meetings. They're not having any healing services right now because they want to obey the government. Otherwise, they'd be having people lined up to be healed of coronavirus, I'm sure.
Of course. You should then go to the hospitals and clear the place out of all the coronavirus victims. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Healing rooms closed until further notice. What are some of the craziest things you've heard, though? Because I've heard a couple of really funny ones. I should say funny, but I heard a guy on the Stand in the Gap radio, which I listen to because I want to hear what the Dominionists are talking about and the Christian right. And one of the guys that was a guest on the show, he's like a Middle East expert, supposedly, in air quotes. And he said the reason that Italy in particular was hit so hard with the virus was because in the Vatican basement, the Pope is holding artifacts from the Temple of Solomon that the Roman soldiers took in 70 AD, and he's not giving them back to Israel so they can rebuild their temple. And so this is God's judgment against Italy because the Pope is holding artifacts from the temple in the basement of the Vatican. I mean, that's the level of crazy. The other one, of course, we hear things like, why did it start in China? Because the Chinese government has persecuted Christians. So there you go. There's your explanation. So we hear, some pretty crazy interpretations.
Yeah,
what have you guys heard?
Theories abound.
Yeah. I don't know if I can top those other than the one I mentioned earlier from our lieutenant governor in Texas. There are things more important than living.
Well, and we've heard that echoed, that the problem can't be worse than the cure, or something like that, or the cure can't be worse than the whole issue, which was a talking point Trump picked up from somebody on Fox News. And they're saying, if we destroy the economy, then that's worse than tens of thousands of people dying. So let's just get back out there and let the chips fall where they may. And if a few thousand people die or tens of thousands die, well, that's still better than killing the economy. It's crazy.
I saw one picture today taken of a march in Tennessee of a woman holding a sign, and it says, "Sacrifice the weak, open the economy."
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not suggested or, insinuated. It's blatant.
They've said it. Well, I was thinking of another crazy one. Pastor Perry Stone, speaking of Tennessee, this is one of the funniest ones I've heard. He said, the reason that the coronavirus, it's a satanic attack, and the reason that it's really targeting the older population is because they're the ones who are really in the Bible, and they're the devoted Christians, and they know the truth. They're the ones who, when the Antichrist comes, will not take the mark of the beast. So Satan is trying to clear that entire generation away so that the younger ones who will take the mark of the beast will be the only survivors. So that's why it's something that's targeting the older generation. I mean, okay, is it because the Pope's holding stuff in the Vatican basement, or Satan's trying to clear out a whole generation that wouldn't take the mark of the beast? I mean, come on.
Just all the above.
All of the above. Which is it? God's judgment, or it's not God's judgment, or is it, A, B, C, D, E? How long of a list? Yeah.
I remember one of the things that inspired me or motivated me, whatever you want to call it, to become born again when I was a teenager was I got the shit scared out of me by Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's some scary stuff in there. And I was the ripe old age of maybe 14 or 15. And I was terrified because you've got everything in there from demons and whores of Babylon and dragons and
pestilence, plagues, everything.
Pestilence, and
you name it. Famine.
Famine and left behind and all that stuff. And it's just that tactic of interpretation. But there's other ones, but this particular one that I was fed, it just turned you into a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah. You have to figure out when all this is going to happen.
Yeah, everything's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
And that led me into all kinds of rabbit holes. And, so the whole conspiracy thing is just our daily bread, I think, with a lot of these religious groups. Don't you think?
Yeah, it is. Well, and someone said the issue with evangelicals in particular is the denial of science, as Tim was saying, and then the lack of critical thinking, which in some ways I think because they're spoon-fed every Sunday, and I hate to say it, all three of us were part of that system, spoon-feeding every Sunday, preaching those sermons, interpreting the Bible for them, explaining it, applying it even. You don't have to think sitting in those church pews. You just have to go and do what the preacher says the Bible says you should be doing or shouldn't be doing.
Right.
So there's a lack of critical thinking, and that's ingrained in the system, I think, and we're seeing that now. Well, I have one last question. I know you guys have stuff to do, but as now ex-pastors and ex-evangelicals, what's your advice for people to cope with the anxiety that they might be feeling, especially if they left religion, let's say, and they're thinking, well, what do I have how to cope with this thing? How do I cope with the anxiety? I can't pray because I don't believe in God anymore, or whatever they're thinking. How do you cope with it?
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I think staying busy and having my wife and I are building an above ground garden. And it's something that, I'm still working, and so I stay busy working, but every day I'm taking a little bit of time to work on that. That feels good. We started playing Scrabble every afternoon, trying to just, have some time to have fun together. Talking to family over the phone. But I think it gives rise to another topic, which is very closely related, and that is, how do we in the secular community, we don't say I'll pray for you anymore, and I understand the emptiness of that phrase and how it can be uttered flippantly, but the one thing I do miss a little bit is that it was a way that people said, I care what's happening to you. So I try to say things like, I'm not on the playing field of your life, but I'm in the stands cheering for you, or I'm really sorry you're going through that, or I'm sending you a virtual embrace. But I haven't found anything that I really like that feels as good or concise as that old "I'm praying for you." And I don't believe in prayer anymore. I don't believe in God. But to get back to your question, Clint, we need to encourage each other. We need to be there for each other. And ironically, the social media has taken on a new meaning, I think, in these days, because it can be a way of staying in touch with people. And I don't know, I enjoy seeing when somebody on Facebook, they post a picture of what they had for lunch. Good. I mean, I kind of like it. It's like, thanks for showing me what you're doing,
Share your life.
It feels good to have some kind of connection with people. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I actually may have had coronavirus back in March for 2 weeks, and I will never be sure until you can take the antibody test. But I don't know if I had it. I don't know if I'll get it. Because of my age, I'm in the high-risk group. I think about that. I think about my children and my grandchildren. As a secular person, sometimes life is hard. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen, and you just have to have courage and get up every day and keep going.
That's true. Any words of wisdom, David, for people that might be struggling with anxiety?
Well, I'll tell you what I do. One is to keep my sanity, I stay off of Twitter as much as I can, because the longer I scroll, the more riled up I get. And so I catch my news and the headlines, and then I try to leave it alone. Like Tim, Lisa and I try to do healthy, outdoorsy kind of things. So we go for walks every day around the ponds and lakes and trails and stuff with our dog. and just be out in nature. I listen to music a lot. I read and watch things that are inspiring and have the appreciation of beauty and the sanctity of human life. So, for example, last night I watched Terrence Malick's new film, The Hidden Life, and reading books about people who live sacrificially and serving others. And that's something else I do too, is like the good news channel. You know, just there's some amazing people in this world doing amazing things for others, and it's just really, really inspiring. I mean, you know, not everyone's evil.
Sure.
and trying to line their pockets with people's tax dollars, you know, and there's a lot of neat things going on out there, kind of like what the movie last night was about, The Hidden Life. There's a lot of people doing things we'll never know about, we'll never hear about, nobody will ever visit their grave, but they're changing the world one person at a time, and that's what keeps me going.
I really resonate with what you said, because that was something Janice Selby and I talked about a few weeks ago, coping with anxiety during the time of the coronavirus. And she said, yeah, you need to find things that are for you are personally inspiring. And that's a really good piece of advice. Whatever that might be, you have to find it, whether it's online with a support group or watching movies or reading books or reading articles about the good things. There's a lot of good things happening in this world, but we're, like you said, we're subsumed with the negative attention and all the doom and gloom. You can easily start obsessing over all that, and then you're just like, oh my God, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. We're in Revelation now, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, I know you guys have stuff to do. David, you've got another interview coming up in a few minutes. Thank you guys so much for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. Hopefully this will help people kind of maybe think some things through, deconstruct maybe a little bit. I'm curious to find out what people think. So thank you, Tim and David, for taking some time out.
Thank you.
Thanks,
enjoyed
man.
it.
Good hanging out with you, Tim.
Yes, likewise, David.